Hi, I'm Rabbi Phil Cohen. In June of 2025, I traveled to Israel hoping to meet with rabbis and talk with them about their lives in the rabbinate, mainly in Israel. It goes without saying that I've been deeply interested in Israel for as long as I can remember. Its people, its arguments, its constantly shifting present. But this time, I wanted to listen in a somewhat different way. I wanted to hear the stories of Israeli rabbis, why they chose this calling, what sustains them, what they have learned, and what they hope for specifically in the Israeli context. And I was very lucky. I met with men and women from different denominations, different stages of life, different corners of the country. My plan was to visit them in their homes, to sit across from them and talk face to face. Unfortunately, the week I arrived, Israel entered a 12-day clash with Iran. I ended up conducting all of my interviews from my Airbnb on Zoom. Incoming missiles interrupted one interview as my subject and I both fled to shelter. Even on Zoom, however, the conversations, all of them, were rich, revealing, and deeply human. Something unexpected came out of that experience. Originally, I had planned to speak with rabbis all around the world for this podcast. Maybe I still will going forward. But for now, I'm staying with Israeli rabbis. Their stories and Israel's stories are bound up together in very interesting and creative ways, and I find that connection endlessly fascinating. That, then, is what this podcast is about. The lives, the questions, the faith of those who serve the Jewish people, and the God with whom we live in covenant across our shared history. I am Rabbi Phil Cohen, and I am a small part of that story. Rabbi Nama Kelman is an American-born Israeli Reform rabbi. After moving to Israel in 1976, she earned a Master of Arts degree in social work from the Institute of Contemporary Jewry at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. In 1992, Rabbi Kelman made history as the first woman in Israel to be ordained as a rabbi. She served as the Dean of Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, the Jerusalem campus, beginning in 2002. So to the left of my screen this morning is Rabbi Nama Kelman, who is Israel's first woman rabbi, also a woman reform rabbi, having graduated from the Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, Jerusalem School. So welcome and thank you very much for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time. How was it that you came to be in the rabbinate?
I was born into a rabbinic family. I represent 10 generations on my father's side of a Hasidic dynasty. And my mother's father, my grandfather, was a prominent reform rabbi in Chicago, Rabbi Felix Levy, Temple Emmanuel, early Zionist. So you could say that Freud used to say about women that biology is destiny. Of course, he was referring to our maternal role and not to our professional roles, but I certainly had plenty of rabbinic DNA. And if I was raised to be anything in my general environment, it was to marry a rabbi, to give birth to a rabbi, but certainly not to become a rabbi. That was... in the 1960s, that was certainly not in the cards. Having said that, my father was an important conservative rabbi, Rabbi Wolf Kelman. He was the head of the Rabbinical Assembly of the conservative movement, and our lives were surrounded by rabbinic students and rabbis and rabbinic culture. It was almost inescapable. It certainly was for my brother, who was the heir apparent, firstborn son. He was not going to break the chain of 10 generations. Luckily for me, I was born into a wave of feminism. I'm never sure if it's the third, the second, the third. 1970, Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedan marched down Fifth Avenue, and really a wave of incredible feminism is born, to which I am lucky to be swept up in, although it wasn't an easy journey. So I also was raised at Camp Ramah, where literally I remember when I was in the younger side of the camp, I could lead the Grace After Meals, Birkat Hamazon for 300 campers, and I could lead part of the tefillah services, but the minute we passed to past 13 to the older camp, suddenly I was allowed only to call out the pages.
Which Ramah did you go to?
Ramah in the Berkshires, Ramah in Palmer. In 1969, 1970, feminism is hitting Camp Ramah, which is at that point quite traditional in its, on the one hand, but in other ways, girls could do almost everything in sports and leadership. So there was what feminists called the big click, where suddenly you realize, wait a minute, I'm being raised like my brother, but at some point, I hit a wall, and I was part of a group that walked out of tefillah services one Shabbat morning, and another group, and the Great Compromise, 1970, Camp Ramah in Palmer, Naamah Kellman is allowed to lead Havdalah, the service ending Shabbat. That was the big compromise. But clearly, once I got to college, it was a different story, where I had wonderful Hillel rabbis who realized that they should promote me and kind of gear me towards rabbinic leadership. Although, again, it's not till Sally Priesand is ordained in 1972 that there is this possibility of women being rabbis, at least in the Reform movement. And 1973, I attend the first major conference, 500 women in the McAlpin Hotel in New York City. I think I would call it the Big Bang of Jewish feminism. For the first time in Jewish history, 500 smart, angry, brilliant women get together and say, we've got to start a revolution. And I was among the youngest people participating. But that, again, launched me into taking a more active role in our services at University of Pennsylvania. There was a kind of chavurah where I was asked to lead tefillah. So certainly my involvement in college got me on the road of, I wouldn't say rabbinic leadership, but certainly taking on all the roles I learned to read. I had a bat mitzvah in 1968. I had a bat mitzvah at Congregation Anshe Chesed in New York City. Oh, I sang the Haftarah, the prophetic section. I was not called to the Torah. A very prominent conservative rabbi patted me on the head after that and said, well, that's very nice, dear. The first and last time you will do something like that.
He said that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So
I won't ask you his name.
I won't share it either. I mean, my father, who had an incredible sense of the moment, I was addressed by Judith Kaplan, who was our neighbor, who was the daughter of Mordecai Kaplan, Judith Kaplan Eisenstein, the first bat mitzvah in history. She addressed me that evening.
Well, I bet her father didn't pat her on the head when she was done.
That's right. So, and then after college, I arrived in Israel in 1976, full of the kind of American can-do ism, riding the wave of, you would say the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, and the spirit of the 60s. I get to Israel and there's absolutely no place for me to pray, to daven, really. There's no place here.
So you came to Israel under what circumstances?
Post-college internships. In those days, Israel was a place you'd come for adventure and excitement, and you'd start on kibbutz, or in my case, I started on kibbutz, and then I had this internship in Jerusalem, and that's where you came, Jerusalem. And getting here, realizing, coming from such an active Jewish home, and by that point, I was leading part of the University of Pennsylvania, leading our chavurah services all the time, and I was in various consciousness-raising groups. I was attending one of the first women's seders, which were wild. At the beginning, what we put on the Seder plate. Forget the orange is nothing compared to what was on the first Seder plate I participated in. And so maror, bitterness, was saying, my brother had a bar mitzvah, I didn't, my brother this, my brother that. So I was definitely part of the really gutsy wave. And I get to Israel, and all Israelis know is you're either secular or you're Orthodox. And even the word dati, which just means religious, has been totally co-opted by the Orthodox. Israel in 1976 barely has a reform or conservative presence. It's really small, and in the major cities, and mostly brought there had been a wave of German Reform Jews who you could say in the 40s, the 50s began, but it's really the post-1967 wave that brings lots of conservative rabbis and some Reform rabbis that begin to build the basis of non-Orthodox liberal Judaism in Israel. And in 1977, a group of my friends came from Penn, and we went to the conservative synagogue on Agron Street in Jerusalem and said, "Do you mind? Can we have a place to pray and create an egalitarian minyan?" And they were truly generous. I think also for them it was a great solution. If people came from America and wanted an aliyah, they could say, "Go next door to our young people." And so I founded, in some ways, the egalitarian chavurah with my friends in 1977. Most of them went back to the States after a year or two, and I was left here working in community organizing and Jewish education. And again, it didn't really strike me that I should become a rabbi, believe it or not. It was just something so foreign.
Had you become a citizen by then?
Yeah. By 1979, I was a citizen, and I was going back to America and taking part, living back in New York. There are all the various egalitarian minyanim, groups, chavurot, and American Jews were rapidly becoming egalitarian, while Israel was very much behind. And even the Reform movement took time. I mean, Sally Priesden really was the trailblazer, but it took one or two or three. It took a while for more and more women to begin to study at HUC. And of course, then the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College accepted women. And it's, by the way, not until 1985 that the Jewish Theological Seminary ordains their first woman, Rabbi Amy Albergs. In 1981, I heard that there was a program at HUC for ordaining Israelis. Now, it was tiny, minuscule, but I went to see Rabbi Richard Hirsch, who was a dear friend of my parents. And in fact, his first job was serving with my grandfather at Temple Emmanuel in Chicago, sometime in the 50s. So he knew my family well. And I went to see him and I said, "I understand there's a rabbinic program here. Should I consider it?" And he kind of said, "Whoa, this is crazy. Our men can barely function." And he began to talk me out of it. And then he said, "This is crazy. Why am I talking you out of it? Like the tradition of converts, I should be encouraging you." And I'll never forget what he said. He said, "You'll be the Jackie Robinson of women rabbis, the first." But he scared me enough that I backed off, 1981. And it's really not till Amy Alberg is ordained where I felt, okay, all the American seminaries are behind me now.
If you don't mind, I want to probe that just a little bit. I mean, I don't want to go deep into your psyche, but what was it that scared you off? I mean, in the end, he ended up kind of encouraging you, but it wasn't sufficient for you to say, "I'm going to."
Right. Well, I think I was then, it's 1981 and young, married. I'm going to start having children. And it just seemed so much was insurmountable then, it seemed. And the program was so small. And even, my father, who was among those rabbis pushing for accepting women and all that, saw how hard it was that women weren't getting, the few women that were being ordained, how hard it was for them to get placed. It just felt like, kind of insurmountable. It wasn't quite the moment for me. And I was right. I just waited 4 years, basically. And meanwhile, I ran this minyan, the egalitarian minyan, and I was working then at that point in Jewish education at the Melton Center in Hebrew University. And then once, as I said, JTS ordained Amy Batchamy, said, "Okay, go." And the conservative movement opened an Israeli rabbinic program as well at that point. So in 1986, I applied to both programs. And the program at what was then called Machon Schechter, the conservative movement, rejected me in their rabbinic program, accepted me into a kind of education track. And I felt I'm going to spend half my time fighting my own institution for legitimacy. And the reform movement, HUC, Rabbi Hirsch, others welcomed me with open arms. And in some ways, I never left HUC from that day on. They kept me there. They wouldn't release me to the public. I finished my schooling, and then I worked in various jobs at the Israeli reform movement, and then moved over to HUC, and I kept moving up. It's like I started in the mailroom until I hit the deanship in 2009.
You're the third person I've spoken to who graduated from the program. But tell me a little bit about the structure of the program, faculty.
Well, it was very cut and paste to mouth. Whoever was available when I started, there were maybe 5 of us in the program. At that point, the classes were after the year in Israel, which is the big program at HUC Jerusalem then. Now it's totally switched. I'll get to that. But in those years, the campus was built mostly for the year in Israel of our North American students.
Right.
And they were anywhere from, 50 to 60, 70, huge, big numbers. And we were an afterthought. And kind of no one knew what to do with us. And only in 1985 is there an established Israeli reform movement. Then it was under the auspices of the World Union for Progressive Judaism. And then also in 1985, for the first time, UJA, United Jewish Appeal, through the Jewish Agency and through the pressure of American reform and conservative rabbis, start funding local Israeli movements. So starting 1985, the reform movement gets a budget to start operating. The conservative movement gets a budget, and that means you can hire an executive director, you can fund youth work, you can fund all sorts, and it begins. So in some ways, I was really here from the initial ground swept to launch. I was in, and others were part of the kind of the launch of the Israeli reform movement, starting in the late 1990s. Uh-huh. Where there's a movement, where there's a rabbinic school, where there are a handful of synagogues. My brother starts his congregation also in 1985, and
tell about the congregation.
So my brother had been on Kibbutz Gezer, was kind of functioning as a rabbi there. He graduated JTS in 1979, 80. I can't remember the exact year. And he makes Aliyah to Kibbutz Gezer. Like I said, that the excitement was still in the kibbutzim. And he founds a little synagogue there, which Rabbi Mary Gold eventually takes over. And in 1985, he moves to Jerusalem and decides to found a progressive or reform synagogue in Jerusalem, a certain neighborhood in the Baka German colony neighborhood of Jerusalem. And he also goes to Rabbi Hirsch, again, family friend, who says, here's a paycheck, get going. And my brother starts in his living room and then moves to a local community center. And then, of course, the infamous Simchat Torah, where the local ultra-Orthodox rabbi invades the synagogue, 1986, and makes international news that a Reform synagogue is under attack. Not a pleasant experience. I was there. The base of the rabbi and 2 thugs were trying to steal the Torah from us and yelling at us. And my brother calmly got everybody out singing songs of peace. If only that would stop wars. But the exciting thing was Teddy Kolek, the mayor, then said, I'm giving this synagogue land and a building in Baka, and kind of the rest is history. And over time, my brother raised money to build a much more multifunctional building. And it's a thriving synagogue. He has since retired, and his successor also has maintained its vitality. So So all this is happening the same time, 1985, 86. I start rabbinical school. My brother.
Did you mention the name of the synagogue?
Kol HaNeshama, I did not.
There you go.
Kol HaNeshama, which is from our Psalm 150. Every living being will praise God. Kehilat, the community of Kol HaNeshama. And so there are a number of synagogues now that really see themselves as kind of the synagogue centers. In Kol HaNeshama is kind of founded in 1986. What will become Beit Daniel in Tel Aviv also is founded around that time, which is now have, 4 branches in the Tel Aviv area. Rabbi Meir Azari has been the leader of that. So on the one hand, I started with a lot of uncertainty and are there jobs out there? What am I doing? My brother faces is the same discrimination as I do, not just because I'm a woman, because we are Reform, we are non-Orthodox. And I'll take a moment to explain to the listeners that in Israel, religion and state is completely enmeshed, and all matters of personal status, birth, marriage, divorce, burial, conversion are in the hands of an ultra-Orthodox rabbinic institutional monopoly. And I have no right here as a Reform rabbi to perform a wedding that would be recognized. And it doesn't matter, my brother looks more like a rabbi with his beard, but he can't perform, nor can I perform weddings that are recognized. And that continues until today. Also, 1986, it's important to say, actually, maybe even earlier, 1985, Israel Religious Action Center is founded and based and inspired by the Religious Action Center in Washington. And a young, brilliant Rabbi Uri Regev is appointed. He's both a lawyer and a rabbi to lead Iraq, and thus begins the legal challenges to the system of monopoly, where Iraq chips away at the rabbinic monopoly, the rabbinates, a monopoly on marriage, divorce, conversion. And again, all this together begins to influence the Israelis' understanding that there is an alternative. There might be an alternative. And cases go to the Supreme Court. Some succeed and some don't. One of the first cases to the Supreme Court is the Reform movement and they're representing the conservative movement to allow our rabbis to perform weddings, to have a special status. And by the way, it sat in the courts, I always joke, biblical proportions for 7 years until the Supreme Court finally reaches a decision and says, this is too hot. This is a political hot potato. We're not going to touch it. And at that point, that's already in the 90s, the Reform and Conservative movement go on a national campaign. Let us do your weddings, Jewish, Israeli, egalitarian, go get married in Cyprus. Or in the conservative movement, they recommended not getting married in Cyprus, and we'll do your Jewish weddings. Okay? So we lost in the courts, but we won in the field. Because Israelis by the hundreds began, and now I could say by the thousands.
So let's get clarified. Now, the Cyprus option, and moving up to contemporary times, there's the Utah option, but
Yes.
The Cyprus option is one, but not everybody wants to go do that. And you said the conservative movement didn't favor that. So what's the workaround? I mean, you still have to work with the official rabbinate. Is that correct?
Well, if you are married out of the country by international law, is the Israeli Ministry of the Interior has to register you as married.
Right.
Okay. So, already in 1979, I get married in America, so I can be registered as married because I don't want to go near the Orthodox rabbinate. My daughter, who you interviewed, gets married in Cyprus. Okay. It's just a plane ride away. And she also can register as married. The conservative movement had a different tactic of saying, we're going to do these marriages and send the announcement to the rabbinate and then there are all sorts of legal contracts that they suggest that people do, not just, prenuptials, but what are eventually known as common law marriage. Now, unfortunately, the only way to get divorced in Israel is through the rabbinate. So in some ways, the conservative movement, I don't know if they were prophetic, but a lot of people now won't even do civil marriages because then they would have to get a rabbinic divorce. But having said all that, now Orthodox feminists have non-Orthodox, non-rabbinate. They're Orthodox, non-rabbinate weddings. So I'm just saying this as, so I am becoming a rabbi and leading various programs at HUC while this change is happening and brewing kind of in parallel. So I do not choose the congregational track. First, HUC in 1998, I run what was then our attempt to create a reform yeshiva, Jews all over the world. Then meanwhile, also already 1986, also 7, we found the first reform preschool on the campus of Hebrew Union College campus, okay, which seemed a little empty to us in our chutzpah. And we have the support of the chairman of the board of HUC, Richard Scheuer, who is a guardian angel of our reform education. And we start at Hebrew Union College with kindergarten and first grade. And then again, using all sorts of pressure, we get a school building in an emptying out secular school in Bayit Vagan, and Tali Bayit Vagan is a kind of important model of reform education. We joined the Tali system, which was founded by the conservative movement already in 1976, but we're much more, I would say, militant about our identity. I'm working there as a rabbi. We have a group bat mitzvah for girls in 6th grade. We sponsor lots of family activities at Kol Neshama, so we're kind of the shul with the school. And so Jerusalem is really percolating. And of course, the engine is a lot of American olim like myself, but also Israelis who have either married in or joined in to these efforts to really lay the groundwork of a school system of the reform movement, and then the youth movement grows as well. And needless to say, more people are exposed to bar and bat mitzvah, to weddings. And at HUC, where we had maybe 1 or 2 entering students year after year throughout the 90s, by the time Michael Marmer becomes dean, he was my classmate, and we both were ordained in 1992. 1998, he becomes the dean of Hebrew Union College, and he brings me on, and together we begin to really build programs for Israelis, expand the Israeli rabbinic program, get significant funds for that, eventually create an MA in Jewish education in conjunction with Hebrew University, create a pedagogic center for educational materials and teacher training. And over time, and now I'm moving up the ranks to running the Year in Israel program, associate dean, and eventually dean, young leadership programs for Israelis. So
where's the funding coming from?
Mostly from our donors in the U.S. And we're fortunate that people understand that this is a real opportunity for the college in Jerusalem. And the same is happening in the Israeli movement for progressive Judaism. They are managing to get monies from the Jewish Agency, a lot, and in some ways more than the college. Mm-hmm. The college benefits from the American reform movement. Once there was a membership tax that called mum dues, and they changed their name, where the Hebrew Union College got a significant portion of synagogue, these dues that allowed us, the college, to run. That's not true anymore at all. The funds really have shrunk.
So as have the funds of the URG, Union for Reform Judaism in general.
Correct.
A couple of years ago, I saw a chart of the income generated to the URJ through mum dues, and it was a straight line down.
Starting in 2008,
yeah,
a huge, when there's an economic crisis in America, dues are cut already by 20%, 25%, and they've never recovered. In the 1960s, the union dues covered something like 85% of the Hebrew Union College's needs, right? Since 2008 and beyond. And we're hoping, the college is still hoping to this day, to really fundraise for scholarships so people can come. We believe that's one of the factors of recruitment and enrollment. They're already coming with college loans. Well, we don't want to add on with HUC tuition loans. So as I say, already in the early 2000s, there's a lot going on. Tremendous growth and more synagogues opening. And again, our graduates, Israeli Reform graduates, are being placed in key positions now. And it's not my generation of Anglos, as we call them, American Olim. It's now native-born Israelis. You cannot call Meir Azari. You cannot call Ada Zavidov, a wonderful rabbi. You can't call them for an implant. Gilad Karib, perhaps the most successful in the sense of the public face of Reform Judaism, was a graduate of our program and a lawyer, and now is a member of Knesset. When he gets up in the Knesset and speaks, he speaks as an Israeli Reform rabbi. And of course, they call him terrible things, the ultra-Orthodox. They call him a foreign implant and you name it, but he is not. He's saying that about me, but not about him.
His name keeps coming up. I would imagine almost every conversation I had, because he's a phenom. He's very good. He's very good, and because he's in the Knesset, he's very
articulate. He speaks as a prophetic. He speaks from Jewish sources all the time. Okay, as a Reform rabbi, he sees his work is fulfilling the prophetic mission of that Israel be a light to the nations. And we also have a graduate of ours, Rabbi Noah Satat, who leads the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, which until now it's been led by lawyers and activists. So as I say, we're key positions. If the wonderful, amazing Rabbi Bab Samuels of blessed memory really grew and expanded the Leo Beck Center in Haifa, for the past 15 years or more, it's been run by Israelis. And the current executive director for the past maybe 8 years already is Rabbi Ofek Meir, who, again, you can't say. So, and we have already the second version of a Reform Israeli Siddur, a prayer book, edited by mostly Israeli-born, although input from others for sure. My own daughter is editing a brand new Machzor, for the high holidays in Israeli. So we are gone from kind of the pioneers, settlers, the Chalutzim, which was overwhelming Anglo-Saxon, British, American, Canadians, to Israelis, Israeli-born, who are leading our movement and making a huge difference. There were times we were never in Israeli conversations about Jewish identity here, and already starting in the late 1990s, the Reform movement is a force to be reckoned with around the tables of what does it mean to be an Israeli Jew who's creating innovative, pioneering programs. Now, there are days I feel we're a powerful force to be reckoned with, and there are days I feel like, just bang my head against the wall. We're still only 50-something congregations, and compared to the majority, we have little political power. We have more local power in cities and towns. We still have a Supreme Court that defends us for the most part on all sorts of rights to build synagogues, to expand. So there are times I feel we're still a drop in the bucket here. And there are other times I feel, if I look over, since I've been here close to 50 years, what a remarkable. When I landed here, I felt like a Martian. Now Israelis relate to Reform and non-Orthodox Judaism. And in some ways, part of the problem is that built into Zionism's DNA is the negation of the diaspora. And why the Reform movements are seen and can, as such, all of you could say all of Judaism is, product of diaspora experience, including North African and then Jews from, Arab-speaking countries. And why are we so? Because we're progressive, we're democratic, we're different. We appear more Western, okay, in some ways. I really see ourselves as midwives, successful midwives. In other words, secular Israelis and Orthodox Israelis had looked at our egalitarian life cycle events and said, we can do that too. Again, we were the ones who said, we're going to do this despite the rabbinate. And as I say, liberal Orthodox now have their own weddings, bat mitzvah, all this stuff we kind of midwife these processes, although it has to go through Orthodox hechsher,
But I imagine the population of liberal Orthodox is rather small.
Well, yes, it's true. We certainly know that at the moment, Tzionut Datit, religious Zionism, has been totally taken over by right-wing, fascist-leaning Messianic Orthodoxy. There are people trying to create the original meaning of religious Zionism, which was much more moderate. Yes, it's not huge, but definitely some of these processes and the fact that women get ordained now, a lot in the United States. Maharat just reached their 100th woman that they've ordained. And Maharat is an acronym for woman, rabbi, teacher, halachic, a legal expert. It's a seminary up in Riverdale, New York, and has been ordaining women. And they've just ordained their 100th woman. So that you can't, that's a revolution that's happening. And I believe it would not have happened without us being the forerunners.
Or to give him some credit without Avi Weiss, but sure, he's had to.
Yes, right. And Orthodox male rabbis who believed in women's leadership. So, as I say, I think in some ways when I look back over 50 years, I see how much progress and how much we've managed to become part of the religious Jewish identity landscape. When the war began in October 2023 in Jerusalem, and civil society like now kind of kicks into gear in remarkable ways. Then there was very, very quickly a group of rabbis of Jerusalem got together through WhatsApp and went to homes, Shiva homes of soldiers, of victims of the Nova Festival as teams. And they put this together, the WhatsApp group. All of us were there, modern Orthodox, conservative, reform, and what are called humanistic, secular rabbis. We were all in this group together, which is also a remarkable thing. And a lot of us have been leading in what I call spiritual care and helping with trauma as religious faith leaders, not as professionals. So we've been very, very involved in all those things on the front line in ways that I think we couldn't be before, because we're, as I say, a strong movement that can mobilize our congregants, our congregations in ways we couldn't before. The Leo Beck Center in Haifa, I understand, turned half of its building and parking lot into a shelter, welcoming residents from their nearby area in Haifa for shelter. And when people left the north, taking in the evacuees, my daughter would lead Kabbalat Shabbat services for evacuees. The Reform movement has had a Havdalah service, Saturday evening service, for months and months. We're already 50 at Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. Hundreds of people come, and it's being led by Reform rabbis and song leaders. So we are a presence in ways that are both, remarkable and wonderful, and give me a lot of hope of our presence here. So I've been telling you a lot about the movement, but let me maybe speak a little bit more about myself in line.
But I do want to talk about your own work as the as the dean. And what about the liberal yeshiva? I understand it's long past, but it was an interesting effort, and I would like to know a little bit about that.
Well, again, because there's at that point, the popular yeshiva was Pardes, which it still is in Jerusalem. I'm happy to say it's now run by a Reform rabbi. But in those days, it very much leaned Orthodox. And we felt there was not a Reform yeshiva, which really not only would teach Jewish texts with our interpretation and commentaries, etc., but also we would have tefillah and build a community. And we just didn't succeed in getting the numbers to sustain it. And then I would say that I've been a kind of entrepreneurial rabbi. Mm-hmm. They're founders and they're entrepreneurs. I see my brother as a founder, and he founded something and he stuck with it. I try all sorts of things, get them running, and then hand them over. If the yeshiva, the Reform yeshiva, went for a few years, and then we realized we needed to sunset it. Meanwhile, I moved to the college pretty much full time at that point and started to set up programs and enhance our Israeli rabbinic program. When I studied, there was very little professional development. And one of the things I got involved in was the professional development of rabbis, teaching rabbinic skills, how to lead a tefillah, how to lead a life cycle ritual, and really expanding. I was very involved in the expansion and enhancement of the Israeli rabbinic program. Also, when I was involved in the Year in Israel program for some 5 years, I got that program much more interfacing with the Israeli rabbinic program. There are big age demographic differences between our American students and our Israeli students. Our Israelis come much later in life, after the army, after travel, after college, married, children. It's a much different demography than our Americans, who often come straight from college or a year or two after college, and they're just getting started in life. In my spare time, kept one foot in interfaith work all along, kind of representing the college and all sorts of interfaith dialogues around the world even. And once I became dean, we created, along with some of my senior staff, Ganit Genshel, and actually our Muslim head of housekeeping, Salim Yagmur, an interfaith prayer space we have on campus. I think we're the only seminary to have a prayer room with pillows for our Muslims students, because we brought in a whole Ulpan program that serves mostly. Ulpan is Hebrew teaching of the Hebrew language. We had until this war, starting 2023, hundreds of Arabs on campus, and we saw them praying behind the bushes and places. So we established an interfaith prayer site. So that these are putting some of my values on campus as dean, overseeing that, encouraging professionals on my team to start spiritual care programs. We have a wonderful teacher training program called Teacher's Room, run by Professor Michal Mushkat Barkan, who created a program for Muslim, Christian, and Jewish teachers, how we teach Jerusalem. It's a program run in Hebrew and Arabic. Everything has to be said twice. English isn't privileged, and we've already impacted on hundreds of teachers throughout Jerusalem, how we live parallel and shared Jerusalem. So as dean, the values that I care about, women's leadership, young adult leadership, interfaith, shared, all those have been very much put into action by some of my wonderful key staff members. And in the meantime, for many years, we ran a Shabbat service, high holiday service. Unfortunately, that also began to dwindle. Already with the Intifada, we realized we couldn't, and our American pilgrims were not coming to Jerusalem anymore. So we shifted. And happily, we now have 3-4 Reform synagogues in Jerusalem that we encourage people to attend. Mm-hmm. And we don't come to Hebrew Union College for an English-based service, but go to our synagogues and be part of our synagogues. So a lot has shifted. What the college used to provide, I think, a real center for certainly American visitors. And now our Israeli movement can provide some of that. And it's our graduates. So why not showcase that. So I would say we've been pioneering in spiritual care, which also began, as Michael Marmor used to say, in Israeli hospitals. There are white coats and black coats. The white coats are the doctors and the black coats are the ultra-Orthodox who really just took care of the Shabbos elevator and kashrut. And we and a number of other forces kind of also big push from New York Federation, created the area now of spiritual care, of chaplaincy in hospitals and in other places. So we've been very much part, and my rabbinate is very much part of kind of changing the language and what it means to be a rabbi, what spiritual care is, or what it's about. We don't have a good word for that in Hebrew yet. I think what we do is more what I call livui emuni. It's kind of in accompanying people. How do we give people a sense of purpose and faith in all this chaos? I mean, that's something that I've been working on as a rabbi. How do I do that? What rabbinic tools, what experience can I bring now for people to remain focused on meaning and purpose in the face of so much chaos and loss at this time? So I've been doing some of that in small groups, one-on-one, and I feel it's directly related to my history, kind of evolution as a rabbi. Along all these years, I've done a few weddings or, bar and bat mitzvah. I certainly used to run services at Hebrew Union College. Now I step in for a rabbi at Kol HaNeshama occasionally, preaching here and there. So my rabbinate keeps expanding and unfolding in some way, or become a little more focused, because I can be focused in ways I couldn't be before when I was a full-time administrator, basically.
And so that's wonderful. It's a wonderful conversation. This is a really, really wonderful story. I appreciate your time.
I appreciate you listening and hearing it.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I invite you to stay tuned for future episodes as, with the help of my guests, I continue to unpack the diverse lives that rabbis lead. Special thanks to Steve Lubetkin of Lubetkin Communications for engineering this episode. You can reach me, Rabbi Phil Cohen, at rabbipodcast@gmail.com. Easy enough to remember. Rabbi Podcast, one word, @gmail.com. See you next time, and thanks a lot.